He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Chapter 1. Aliens. It was another glorious and tedious summer's day at Fat Rabbit's farm. Glorious in that the sun hung heavy and untroubled in a powder blue sky, and the poppies of the field swayed lazily in the gentlest of breezes. Tedious in that there was nothing whatsoever to do of any importance, and even if there had been, it was far too hot for anyone to be bothered to do it. Fat Rabbit, as was his wont on such days, was sitting in the shade with his back against the gnarled bark of his favourite chestnut tree in the middle of his favourite field. By his side, a half-empty bottle of Fitou leant precariously in the long grass, propped up by a packet of Marlboro cigarettes. Our hero himself was lost in lazy thoughts that befitted the mood of the day. Lazy, wandering, philosophical thoughts that had a tendency to get lost in themselves and then reappear, quite rudely, some moments later in the middle of a totally unrelated idea. "Tomorrow's triumph this day does prepare," Fat Rabbit declared earnestly to the bottle of wine. "Yesterday's madness, badness, and dangerous despair. Sleep, for we know not whence we came nor why. Sleep, before the pointy stick of fortune pokes you in the eye." Not bad, he thought, reaching for a cigarette. I really must write some of these down. As Fat Rabbit was scribbling a mental reminder to keep a quality notebook and rollerball pen handy at all times, the sound of a gate being heaved open drifted drowsily across the field. Looking up, Fat Rabbit was somewhat taken aback to see his good friend Roger the donkey galloping through the poppies towards him. "What the?" he thought, as for one rather surreal moment the mellow strains of milk chocolate music drifted through his mind. "Roger? Galloping? Again? Bugger!" This was the second time in as many months that Fat Rabbit had been disturbed in his musings by the unnerving sight of a donkey in full gallop, and he sincerely hoped it would be the last. As far as Fat Rabbit was concerned, donkeys weren't made for galloping, and, as a rabbit who liked to believe in the intrinsic orderly nature of the universe, he had always ruffled his fur when things happened that tended to hint that there may be a great deal more chaos out there than Fat Rabbit wished to admit. As Roger screeched to a halt, scattering scarlet poppy petals in his wake, Fat Rabbit stretched open the eyelids of his right eye with his paw and proclaimed defiantly, "Go on, you pointy stick! Do your worst, ya bugger!" "Pardon?" asked Roger breathlessly. "Never mind," sighed Fat Rabbit. "What is it this time?" Fat, gasped Roger. "Rabbit," mumbled Fat Rabbit in his most resigned tone. "Rabbit," finished Roger, finally catching his breath. "Aliens! Aliens have landed! Right here, right now, at the front gate!" "Aliens?" asked Fat Rabbit incredulously. The poor donkey had obviously been out in the sun for too long without his straw hat, or else he'd been munching on the ragwort again. He looked longingly at his unfinished bottle wobbling in the grass, and then back at his friend. "So, you are telling me, are you, that aliens have landed at the front gate?" That was polite of them. "Yes," continued Roger, swishing his tail in helicopter circles, "and I have to take them to their leader. And I think you have to come too." "Do I, indeed?" asked Fat Rabbit. Roger was Fat Rabbit's best and oldest friend, but it would be fair to say that he wasn't the brightest of quadrupeds, and was often confused, bewildered, or simply downright dim. "Yes, please," cried Roger, excitedly jumping up and down on the spot in a way that only hysterical donkeys can carry off with any sense of decorum. Slowly, Fat Rabbit hauled himself to his feet. "Well," he said, "there's not much else happening, so why not? Nice of the buggers to arrive on a slow day. Very thoughtful of them." Picking up his bottle of Fitou, with a rapidly receding hope that he might be able to sneak back without much further ado, Fat Rabbit gestured towards the gate. "Okay, Kemo-sabe. Leave me to your takers." There was quite a crowd gathered in the front courtyard of Fat Rabbit's farm by the time that Roger and Fat Rabbit arrived from the field. The first thing that Fat Rabbit noticed was that the honeysuckle gate that separated the courtyard from Five Folds Lane was closed, where usually it stood open and welcoming to all who happened to pass by. The second thing he noticed was a group of 5 luminescent figures, clad from head to toe in the most dazzling of washing powder white, and who seemed to be in earnest discussion with Fitou the cat, who, as usual, was reclined on his favourite crumbling section of dry stone wall. "See?" declared Roger triumphantly, chasing his tail. "Aliens!" Fat Rabbit had to admit that the strangers at the gate could conceivably have stepped from a mothership. Alternatively, and this was the option favoured by Fat Rabbit, they could equally as well have escaped from a laboratory where unspeakable experiments were carried out in soundproof rooms. As well as Fitou, most of the other inhabitants of Fat Rabbit's farm seemed to have turned out to take a look at the extraterrestrial visitors. Woolly the sheep and Melissa the pig were peering cautiously out from under the shed door, whilst Archibald the retired shy horse was leaning out of his stable, neighing softly about having seen some things in my time. Gerald the sparrow was hopping excitedly from pillar to post, and Blue the collie was simply standing with his hackles raised and barking at strictly regular intervals in the general directions of the strangers, as was recommended in his guard dog's handbook as the proper way for dealing with all alien visitations. Floozy and Treacle, the rabbits who lived at the old mill behind Fat Rabbit's farm, were leaning against the wall by the farmhouse door. As usual, Floozy seemed pretty unperturbed behind her round, mirrored shades, though Treacle was obviously very relieved to see Fat Rabbit ambling across the courtyard. "Cometh the hour, cometh the rabbit," said Floozy, smiling. "Bugger off," retorted Fat Rabbit, stopping to light another Marlboro. "So," he asked, "what on earth, or in space, is going off?" "I truly have no idea, man," said Floozy, peering over her shades. "Nothing new there, then," said Fat Rabbit. "How about you, Treacle? Any idea as to what is happening here?" "Well," began Treacle, fluttering her eyelids rapidly in Fat Rabbit's direction, "apparently these strange beings arrived about 20 minutes ago, and, as usual, they got the 3rd degree from Fitou, who was just trying to get Cheryl to stroke his whiskers. Anyway, they then shut the gate, without so much as a by your leave. At which point Cheryl had the good sense to go and ask Roger to find you, so you can sort it out." "So you don't know what they want, or what they're doing here?" Treacle and Floozy both shook their heads slowly. "You could always go and, ask them, man." "That's just what I'm going to do," muttered Fat Rabbit. And with a final draw on his cigarette, he strolled a dozen or so yards to the gate, to where Fitou and the visitors were still locked in heated discussion. "That bloody time," purred Fitou as Fat Rabbit arrived. "I was just telling this knobhead that we don't as such have a leader, and instead operate a mutually beneficial cooperative, not unlike that proposed by Messrs. Marx and Engels." Fat Rabbit was just about to ask Fitou why, If the farm was a mutually beneficial cooperative, he was the one paying all the bills, fixing leaky gutters, and sorting out the washing up. When just then, a voice boomed out, "Are you in charge around here?" The voice belonged to the tallest of the white-clad figures, who was wearing a white mask across his mouth, and a white hood over his head. In the narrow space between the hood and the mask, Fat Rabbit could just about make out two very dark, cold, and not at all reassuring eyes. For a moment, he considered denying having anything to do with anything, but then realised that Floozy and Treacle were watching, and feigning total ignorance might not be the most impressive course of action in front of the girls. Instead, he opted for a slightly non-committal opening gambit. "Well, yes, I suppose so. It does say Fat Rabbit's Farm on the sign, and I am, admittedly, Fat Rabbit."
"You don't look very portly to me,"
said the figure with a sneer. Now, it was true that Fat Rabbit was indeed somewhat skinny, but the story of how Fat Rabbit came by his misnomer is one that we will have to leave for another day. Before Fat Rabbit could think of a cutting and witty response, something that happened more often than he thought it should for a rabbit of his talents, the figure in front of him cleared his throat and announced, in a voice laden with authority,
"On behalf of Her Majesty's totally together and on the ball government, I hereby inform you, Fat Rabbit, that due to an outbreak of foot and mouth in this vicinity, this establishment is under quarantine, as laid out in Article Foxtrot 6-4 Foxtrot Echo Tango of the Nasty and Obnoxious Diseases Act 1904, and furthermore, that all hoofed animals, as defined under the said Act, should prepare themselves for culling within 72 hours of the reading of this notice. God save the Queen!"
"Not from Alpha Centauri, then?" asked Fat Rabbit, whilst Roger ran around excitedly, swishing his tail and shouting, "I'm going to be culled by the Queen! Hooray!"
He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Nailed it, you bugger.